Winter had already claimed the plains of Nebraska by late October of 1886, and the wind that swept through the town of Millbrook carried with it a cold that settled deep into old wounds. Inside the general store, warmth came from a pot-bellied stove in the corner, but no warmth reached the girl standing near the fabric shelves. Her name was Ruthie, and she was 11 years old. Her hair was dark and unruly, tied back with a piece of string because she had lost her ribbon the winter before, and there had been no money to replace it. She wore a patched brown dress, the sleeves too short for her growing arms, the hem stitched over so many times that the thread had turned a different color from the cloth itself. She stood beside her mother, Martha Callahan, a woman whose hands had grown rough from years of work no husband remained to share. Daniel Callahan had been a cavalry sergeant. He had ridden through gunfire at the Battle of Antietam to carry a wounded officer to safety, an act that earned him a commendation and a small bronze medal that now sat in a cedar box on the mantel. He had left behind a mortgaged homestead, a young widow, and a daughter too small to remember his face clearly. Martha placed a few coins on the counter. "Some flour, Mr. Adkins, and, if you have it, a spool of gray thread." The storekeeper nodded and began wrapping her purchase. Ruthie wandered toward the bolts of cloth stacked near the window, her fingers resting just above a deep blue wool, careful never to touch what she could not buy. It reminded her of the sky just before a storm. The bell above the door rang. Two women entered, wrapped in fox fur collars, their boots clicking sharply against the wooden floor. Mrs. Eleanor Whitfield and Mrs. Constance Ford were the wives of the town's leading businessmen, and they carried themselves as though the store itself existed for their arrival. Mrs. Whitfield's eyes drifted toward Ruthie, taking in the patched dress, the too short sleeves, the frayed collar.
"My word," she said, not lowering her voice. "It looks as though that child dressed herself from a rag bin." Mrs. Ford let out a small, cutting laugh. "The daughter of a decorated soldier, dressed like a beggar. Pride is a fine thing to speak of, but it doesn't mend a hem, does it?" Ruthie's face burned. She stared at the floorboards, wishing she could disappear into the grain of the wood. Martha's spine went rigid at the counter, her jaw tightening, but she said nothing. She could not afford to anger the wives of men who controlled half the credit in town. "Ruthie," Martha said quietly, "come along." They gathered their small parcel and walked toward the door, heads lowered against the laughter that followed them. Neither of them noticed the man standing near the stove, a tall figure in a weathered canvas coat, his hat low over sharp gray eyes. His name was Thomas Whitlock, and he owned the Silver Creek Ranch, the largest cattle operation in 3 counties. He rarely came to town dressed as anything but a working rancher, which is why most strangers mistook him for a hired hand rather than the wealthiest man in the region. He had a daughter of his own, 7 years old, motherless since a fever took his wife 2 winters past. He knew what it meant to raise a child alone against a world that rarely showed mercy. He had heard every word spoken to that girl. He watched her walk out into the cold, shoulders hunched, and something inside him went still and cold in a different way than the weather outside. He did not shout. He did not confront the women. He simply walked to the counter where the storekeeper stood folding fabric. "That blue wool, how much of it do you have?" "About 35 yards, Mr. Whitlock." "I'll take the entire bolt." Mrs. Whitfield turned, startled. "Mr. Whitlock, I was going to purchase several yards for a coat." Thomas looked at her, his expression unreadable. "You had your chance to speak kindly to a child instead of mocking her. Now you'll have to find your wool elsewhere."
He paid in full and asked that it be delivered by wagon before nightfall. Then he walked out, mounted his horse, and rode toward the edge of town, where the bank sat with its brick face and heavy doors. Inside, the bank manager, a narrow man named Percival Cole, greeted him with practiced warmth. Cole was Mrs. Whitfield's brother, though few in town spoke of it openly. "Mr. Whitlock, what brings you in today?" "I want to see the Callahan account." Cole's smile faded. "That's a private matter." "Show me the ledger, Percival." Something in the quiet authority of Thomas's voice made refusal feel impossible. Cole retrieved the book. The original loan, taken out by Daniel Callahan for seed and repairs, had been for $180. The balance now read nearly $400, swollen with penalties for payments missed by mere dollars. "She's fallen behind 3 times, Cole explained. "The bank has to protect itself." "By robbing a widow blind," Thomas said flatly. He understood immediately. The homestead sat along the creek that the new rail spur would need for its water stop. Cole wanted the land, not the money. Thomas paid the full balance on the spot and demanded a signed receipt. Before leaving, he warned Cole plainly that if he ever added a false penalty to that family's account again, every dollar of Silver Creek's business would leave that bank permanently, and he would make certain every rancher in the valley did the same. That night at the Callahan homestead, lantern light flickered as Martha sewed the beautiful blue wool into a dress, her hands moving with a fierce, quiet love. Ruthie watched from her cot, asking softly why a stranger would give them such a gift. Martha only said that some men measure their wealth by what they can build, not by what they can take. Hours later, the dog began barking. Through the frosted window, Martha saw lantern light near the old boundary stone by the creek. 2 men were attempting to move the property marker under cover of darkness, exactly as Thomas had feared. Martha took up her husband's rifle, stepped onto the porch, and fired a warning shot into the night sky. The men scattered as hoofbeats thundered down from the ridge, Thomas and his ranch hands arriving in time to send the intruders running back toward town, empty-handed and terrified. The next morning, the whole town gathered outside the bank as Thomas walked in beside Martha and Ruthie, who wore her new blue dress, standing taller than anyone had ever seen her stand. Thomas revealed what Cole never expected, that the railroad line was funded by Thomas himself, meaning Cole had spent months scheming to steal land in order to sell water rights back to the very man who already owned them. Cole was ruined, forced to resign and leave Millbrook before the season changed. Thomas placed a 10-year water lease agreement into Martha's hands, worth more each year than the farm had earned in 5. Mrs. Whitfield, watching from the doorway, said nothing at all. There was nothing left to say. By spring, the Callahan homestead thrived. Martha kept sewing, refusing extra charity, holding on to her pride even as her circumstances changed. Thomas visited often, sitting quietly on the porch, while Ruthie and his daughter played in the new grass, 2 families slowly becoming one through nothing louder than kindness and time. Years later, when Ruthie left for school in the city, she packed silk dresses and fine shoes, but at the bottom of her trunk, wrapped carefully in cloth, she kept a small patched scrap of brown fabric. She kept it so she would never forget where dignity truly comes from.